There was a time when Japanese motorcycle builders weren't afraid to dream bigger than anyone thought possible, and Suzuki made that dream a reality. In the late 1980s, the company unleashed a machine that stood apart from everything else on the road, the DR Big. It carried the largest single-cylinder engine ever put into production, a piston so massive it seemed to shake the earth itself, and it looked every bit the part, as if it had just stormed out of the Dakar rally, a rolling tank built to devour endless miles of dust, rock, and sand. This was no ordinary trail bike. It was a beast forged for riders who wanted adventure without limits, a motorcycle that sought to be indestructible. Today we're going to relive its legend and uncover the unforgettable chapter it carved into motorcycling history. In the 1980s, motorcycling was swept up in a new kind of fever, the Paris-Dakar rally. It wasn't just a race, it was the ultimate adventure, stretching across thousands of miles of desert, punishing riders with dunes, storms, and brutal heat. To conquer Dakar was to prove both man and machine could survive the harshest conditions on Earth. Every major manufacturer wanted to capture that spirit and bring it to the street. Honda unveiled the Africa Twin, a rugged twin-cylinder machine that promised endurance across continents. Yamaha countered with the Super Tenere, another twin built to mix speed and strength in equal measure. Even the Italians stepped in, Cagiva with its legendary elephant, a rally-bred machine that turned heads with both design and performance. These weren't just motorcycles. They were rolling symbols of conquest, machines that let ordinary riders feel like Dakar heroes every time they turned the key. The marketing was irresistible, the desert spirit packaged for daily life, giving birth to the modern adventure bike as we know it today. And yet, in the middle of this movement, Suzuki chose a different path. While others polished their twin-cylinder formulas, Suzuki prepared to break the mold with something wilder, louder, and far more extreme, a single-cylinder beast unlike anything the world had seen before. By the mid-1980s, Suzuki already had a solid reputation in the trail segment. The DR600, launched in 1985, and the DR650 that followed in 1988, were tough, simple, and reliable. They could handle daily commutes, weekend dirt trails, and everything in between. But while those machines were competent, they weren't groundbreaking. They were workhorses, dependable, but not legendary. Inside Suzuki's design offices, however, the ambition was far greater. The engineers in Hamamatsu didn't just want another trail bike to add to the lineup. They wanted to shake the entire category, to build a motorcycle that would dwarf its rivals and carve out a reputation as the most powerful single-cylinder trail bike ever made. To achieve this, they turned to someone who knew the Dakar better than most, Italian rider Eddie Orioli. Orioli had already proven himself in the brutal African sands, and Suzuki enlisted his real-world experience to shape the project. With his input, the vision became clear. Instead of following the European formula of smooth, balanced twin cylinders, Suzuki would go in the opposite direction. Their answer was radical. Build a single cylinder so large, so raw, and so unforgiving that it would stand as the mechanical equivalent of a rally warrior. A bike that looked and felt like Dakar itself, stripped of refinement but brimming with brute force. That was the seed that would soon become the DR750 Big. When the DR750 Big finally rolled onto the scene in 1988, it wasn't just another entry in the adventure market, it was a statement. Underneath its Dakar-inspired bodywork sat a monstrous 727 cubic centimeter single-cylinder engine, the largest of its kind ever put into mass production. With a simple SOHC, 4-valve design fed by a pair of Mikuni BST-33 carburetors and cooled by a mix of air and oil with the help of an external radiator, it was as rugged as it was brutal. Power came in at about 50 horsepower at 6,500 RPM, but the real story was torque. The DR750 pulled like a tractor, surging forward with a low-end grunt that seemed endless. It was paired with a 5-speed gearbox and bolted into a chassis designed to handle the strain. The bike carried a massive 7.7-gallon fuel tank, towering suspension, and a tall seat height that made even experienced riders feel like they were climbing onto a Dakar rally rig. Gaston Rayet, the diminutive Belgian Dakar champion, once looked almost comical sitting atop one of these tanks. Yet it was clear this was a motorcycle built for giants, and Suzuki wasn't done yet. Just 2 years later, in 1990, they pushed the concept further with the DR800 Big. Displacement climbed to a staggering 779 cubic centimeters, officially cementing it as the largest production single-cylinder engine in history. Output rose to 54 horsepower, with even more torque to flatten hills and devour long roads. The upgrades didn't stop there. CDI electronic ignition, beefier suspension, and stronger brakes made it not only bigger, but tougher. The result was a motorcycle that didn't whisper refinement, it shouted raw mechanical dominance. If the engine was the heart of the DR Big, its design was the soul. Suzuki didn't try to disguise this machine as a polite street bike with off-road cosmetics. Instead, they leaned fully into the Dakar look. The most striking feature was the massive dual-tank setup, holding close to 6 gallons in later versions, giving the rider an autonomy that few bikes could match. You could disappear into the wilderness for days without worrying about the next gas stop. Up front was the unmistakable duckbill fairing, a feature borrowed directly from rally bikes. More than just a visual statement, it helped cut wind at highway speeds and provided extra protection for the rider. That styling cue would later be copied and refined by other adventure machines, most notably the BMW GS line. The riding position was equally purposeful. A tall seat offered commanding visibility on the highway and full control on dirt tracks. Wide handlebars and a generously padded saddle meant you could ride for hours without feeling broken. Long travel suspension soaked up potholes, rocks, and ruts with ease, making the DR Big as comfortable on a dirt trail as it was barreling down a gravel road. Even at a standstill, it carried a presence. Parked in front of a cafe or gas station, it looked like something straight out of Dakar, tall, rugged, and intimidating. You didn't even need to start the engine for people to know it was serious. It was a motorcycle that demanded respect, a rolling declaration that you were ready to cross continents. The DR Big had plenty of strengths, and for riders who connected with its personality, it was close to irresistible. Its engine was brutally simple and remarkably tough. With fewer parts than a twin, it could take punishment in harsh environments and keep going when other bikes faltered. The torque-rich delivery made long highway stretches feel effortless, while the Dakar-inspired ergonomics turned every ride into an adventure. For many, it wasn't just transportation, it was an experience, a chance to taste the wild freedom of the desert without ever leaving home. Its presence was another advantage. Few bikes looked as commanding. With that massive fuel tank, rally fairing, and tall stance, the DR Big projected an aura of indestructibility. Even standing still, it seemed ready to charge across Africa. For riders who wanted something different, something that shouted individuality, it was perfect. But owning a DR Big was never easy. At over 485 pounds in running order, it was a handful, especially off-road. Dropping one on a muddy trail meant wrestling an elephant back to its feet. And then there were the vibrations. That single massive piston hammered away like an industrial blender, sending constant jolts through the bars, the pegs, and right into the rider's body. Long trips could leave you more exhausted from the shaking than the miles. Fuel consumption was another drawback. Despite its giant tank, the bike often drank heavily, cutting into the practical range. Add in its sheer bulk on tight trails, and it sometimes felt less like a nimble gazelle and more like a lumbering beast. The DR Big was spectacular, but it demanded patience, strength, and above all, commitment. For all its charisma, the DR Big never quite found its footing in the marketplace. On paper, it offered adventure in its purest form, brutal power, Dakar styling, and the aura of indestructibility. But in daily life, the compromises became clear. Its sheer weight made it a handful off-road, and when the bike went down, lifting it back up was an exhausting chore. Add in the constant vibration from that massive single cylinder, and long rides could feel less like journeys of discovery and more like endurance tests. Fuel consumption didn't help. Even with its enormous tank, the real-world range often fell short of expectations. Riders who had hoped for a limitless desert conqueror discovered instead a machine that could drain both fuel and energy faster than anticipated. Meanwhile, the competition was moving in another direction. Honda's Africa Twin 750 and Yamaha's XTZ 750 Super Tenere both relied on twin-cylinder designs that smoothed out vibrations, delivered stronger top-end power, and proved more comfortable on long highway stretches. These bikes were heavy too, but they struck a balance that appealed to a broader audience. Against this backdrop, the DR Big struggled to win buyers. It was admired, respected, even feared, but rarely chosen. By 1997, Suzuki quietly discontinued the model, closing the chapter on its most radical adventure experiment. What remained was not a bestseller, but a cult icon, remembered more for its daring than its sales charts. Although the DR Big never reached mass-market success, it left behind something more valuable, a legacy. Riders who experienced it firsthand knew it was unlike anything else. No other manufacturer dared to build a single cylinder that massive, and in that boldness, the DR Big carved its place in motorcycling history. Its influence was undeniable. The iconic duckbill fairing that gave it such a distinctive face didn't vanish when the DR disappeared. Instead, it inspired future adventure designs, most famously the BMW GS series, which would go on to dominate the category for decades. In many ways, Suzuki's radical gamble helped shape the very DNA of the modern adventure bike. For collectors and travelers, owning a DR800 today is like owning a piece of Dakar itself. It may not be the most comfortable, nor the smoothest, but it embodies something authentic. It carries the spirit of an era when bikes were built with more muscle than polish, when adventure was about grit rather than electronics. On the second-hand market, the DR Big has become a cult classic. Surviving units are rare, parts can be tricky to track down, yet communities of enthusiasts keep them alive. For those who choose to ride one today, it's not about convenience. It's about passion, about standing out in a world of polished, computer-managed machines. The DR Big remains what it always was, a beautiful beast. A machine that dreamed of being queen of the desert, but ended up something perhaps more enduring, the queen of the hearts of riders who still value raw adventure. The Suzuki DR Big was never meant for everyone, and maybe that's exactly why it endures. It was heavy, loud, and unforgiving. Yet it was also bold, unforgettable, and true to the spirit of Dakar. It showed us that adventure is not about comfort, but about daring to ride something that feels alive beneath you. More than 30 years later, the DR Big still roars in memory. It wasn't the smoothest or the fastest, but it was authentic. And in a world crowded with polished electronic adventure bikes, authenticity is what makes it timeless. Did you ever ride a DR Big, or at least see one rumbling down the road? Share your story in the comments below. If this tale stirred a bit of nostalgia, give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep these legends alive together.